Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Thursday, February the 12th, and welcome to our commentary. Well, I want to talk about Cuba today because there's some interesting things happening down in the island that I think will have an impact on the future. But let me begin by reminding you that I have a post over at the American Thinker today talking about Democrats and primaries. You may have heard the news that over the weekend in the 11th district up in New Jersey, they had a primary, and this was to replace the lady who became governor of New Jersey. And this was, as we were told, a moderate district, as we were told that she was also a moderate Democrat. Well, maybe she is, and maybe the district is, but it didn't vote moderate. It went ahead and elected, in a very close election, to say the least, in a primary, a pretty left-wing candidate, somebody more, let's say, in tune with AOC and people on that side of the party. And once again, we see that movement within the party winning primaries. AOC herself started out as a candidate like that and ended up getting elected to Congress. We've seen others in New York and in other places as well. And this is happening within the Democrat Party. If you're a Democrat out there and let's say you represent a Democrat district, meaning that a Democrat is going to win that district, your biggest fear is not the Republican candidate. Your biggest fear is what just happened in New Jersey, a challenge from the left. And I think you're going to see a lot more of those this year because this victory in New Jersey is simply going to encourage more of these people to run in the primaries. And you're going to have some interesting, if the let's say the Democrats were to win the House, and right now the bet is that they will, not by a lot of districts, but by a handful of districts. But nevertheless, what it means is that there are going to be a lot more Democrat representatives in the next House that are going to be more like this and not like, let's say, the more moderate lady who became governor of New Jersey. So I think it could be a real headache for the Democrats as they, run for or project themselves to be the majority in the House next year. Imagine some of those votes that these, whoever the speaker is, I would assume the speaker would be Hakeem Jeffries. Imagine the kind of negotiations he's going to have to do with these people who are very much to the left and interested in very radical things that I don't think the Democrats were going to be talking about if they take over the House. So it's just something to keep an eye on. But I think there will be more of these primaries in 2026, and get ready for it. Get ready for it because this is happening within the Democrat Party. Well, let's talk a little bit about Cuba. I have a post coming out Friday morning talking about the future of Cuba. And of course, before we get to the future of Cuba, we have to talk about Cuba right now. Cuba is falling apart, as you know. They don't have any oil. But the most important thing that is happening is that they're losing all their friends. They're being left alone. Remember that song by Brenda Lee, All Alone I Am? Well, that's what Cuba is right now. They don't have any friends. They don't have anybody who's going to bail them out with subsidized oil or free oil or any subsidies like that as they got over the years from the Soviet Union. That's over. It's over right now. And many countries are looking at Cuba and seeing what it is, a underperforming economy that needs radical change. So why is this happening? Why is it all of a sudden, for example, that more and more countries are simply saying goodbye to Cuba, or the Cuban government, that is, not the people, the Cuban government? I think it's because it's not fashionable anymore to ally yourself with Cuba. For a long time, some leftist, left governments of the left, I should say, and whether it was Mexico or Nicaragua or other countries, would align themselves with Cuba. It was more symbolic than anything else because these countries were still capitalist, but they aligned themselves with Cuba because they wanted to be, they wanted to show the world that they could stand up to the United States. I think Mexico was clearly in that group. But right now, I mean, Cuba doesn't do anything for you. It doesn't really have a market for your products. I mean, the only thing going on in Cuba right now are the resorts. And how many more hotels can the country handle? Not too many more. They've got plenty of them. So, how about the markets, consumer markets? Cuba really doesn't have one. So there's really very little to invest in other than tourism. And that's what's happening. Some of these countries have made loans to Cuba. I mean, many European banks made loans to Cuba over the last 20 or 30 years, and Cuba is still trying to repay them because it doesn't have the ability to take any of this money and turn it into any productive investment and then turn around and pay you off. So the country's running out of friends, and that's what my post is all about. It doesn't have any more allies, economic, political, and I think it's only a matter of time before the whole thing collapses. Now, what we are hearing is that there are talks with people within Cuba to create some kind of a transition. We're also hearing that there are negotiations. Again, this is all hearsay. None of this is official, but it's coming from some pretty good places. That they're trying to come up right now with a way of getting Raúl Castro and the president of Cuba, Díaz-Canel, out of Cuba to Russia, basically, and they would step away, and then some kind of a new transition would take over. That's what we're hearing. Whether that happens next week or 2 months from now, 3 months from now, I don't know. But the end is coming, and it's coming, as I said, as I say in my article, because frankly, Cuba's not fashionable anymore. Countries doing business with Cuba, they have nothing to do business with. There's no market there because the communist government destroyed all of that. So basically, you either invest in putting up new hotels, or you simply make loans that are never going to get repaid, and so on. So change is coming, and change is coming because it has to come, and also because there are things that are happening right now, I think, between the Trump administration and people in Cuba to bring about this transition. So it could be similar to what is happening in Venezuela with just, obviously, I don't think they're going to arrest anybody like they did with Maduro. But there are Florida legislators who have introduced a bill to declare Raúl Castro a criminal for the shooting of those Cuban Americans back in those flights, Brothers to the Rescue, that happened about 30 years ago. I don't think that's going to materialize, but nevertheless, there are people talking about that. So the possibility that Raúl Castro could be arrested, or Díaz-Canel, who is the head of the government, he's more of a titular head. I mean, Raúl Castro is running it. But I don't think those two are going to be arrested like Maduro. I think it's a different situation. But there's no question that change is coming, and it's coming fast. And, as I write in my post, anytime I think about change in Cuba, I have to think about my parents who passed away a few years ago. And, we used to talk a lot. I mean, this is one of the things you do in a Cuban family, I guess. You talk about when that day comes, that there's going to be a change. And I don't think we ever saw the change coming quite this way. My mom always thought that it would be more violent. And my father, he kind of thought it would be violent too, but he thought it could be like this, where countries just walk away from Cuba. So anyway, for them and in their memory, I always think about change in Cuba without question. So let's pray for a change, and let's hope it's not violent. That's all I can say. Well, if you saw these little clips of the Attorney General of Minnesota before the Senate, if you saw the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, before the House yesterday, these hearings have become nothing but shouting matches, and whoever's asking the questions is sort of giving a speech. And I think we may want to reconsider these hearings, or at least the format. It may be impossible to do because every member of Congress wants to have his 5 minutes so they can deliver a speech and put it on the internet. But we're not getting anything done. I mean, nothing is happening. We're not learning anything other than I hate you and you hate me type of question and answer sessions. And Look, I'm not saying it didn't happen before, but I'm seeing a lot more of this now, and I think social media probably has a lot to do with that happening. So we got to get back into a little bit more civility in these hearings, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen anytime soon because there are some deep divisions in the country. Well, let me take you back in history. 1809. Man by the name of Abraham Lincoln was born. Of course, he went on to become the 16th president of the United States, number 16, that is, president of the United States. And I think, arguably the greatest, him and Washington, I guess, one of those two would be the greatest president. What's amazing about Lincoln is that 10 years before he became president, nobody knew who he was. I mean, in a very short time, he went from being just a state rep in Illinois to even a U.S. Rep in the Congress to being a lawyer to being a speaker to all of a sudden he's the candidate for president in 1860 and wins an election with about 42% of the vote because the country was so divided. But, he was president of the United States during the most difficult time. And I think he did a pretty good job kind of, keeping the country together. So he's my favorite of all the American presidents. He's the one that I read most about. Yeah, again, Washington was very important too. But Abraham Lincoln is the one I always had an interest in. And so I always enjoy talking about him on this anniversary of what would have been, let's see, 1809. So that means almost 200, my God, 216 years ago he was born. That's a long time to be talking about somebody. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.